Good morning. This is Blaine Pardo, award-winning and New York Times bestselling author, and welcome to Writers Fix Problems. Today, we're going to be talking about a book that's really intriguing to me. I got sucked into this book. It took me only 4 days to finish it, and I'm working on 6 books at a time. So that it got bumped higher in the priority list just because it was so intriguing. As always, we're going to be doing a review of the book, but first I'd like to welcome Jane-Marie Auret, who's joining us today. And we're going to be talking about her book, Screens and Ego. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Now, we always make our authors go through a little bit of torture, which is my review of your book. This will go up on Amazon as well. I encourage everybody, to pay attention to this because this is a very different kind of book. And I was telling my wife about it last night and she was totally caught up in it. So I have a feeling I'm going to be having to get her a hard copy because she won't read on her Kindle. So this popped up on my Defiance Press list of books and the title intrigued me, so I purchased it.
Okay.
To me, any help in understanding Gen Z would be a plus. I'm a baby boomer and they're a very deeply confusing generation, filled to the brim with contradictions, twisted truths, and a little bit of disbelief. This book comes at you with a 1-2 punch. The author presents a narrative. She weaves a modern day story around the events that I presume happened in real life to her. It is gritty at times, gut-wrenching at others. The reader is drawn into these story chapters because the stories all smack of such authenticity and realism that they can't be put down. The story chapters are then followed by a decomposition of how the characters ended up in their plights. Now, these sections deconstruct the realities of the world that they're intertwined in with social media, misinformation, corrupt adults, and social agendas. This section is not preachy or boringly analytic. It is blunt, irrefutable logic. Ms. Auret's tight narrative is like a rubber band that snaps around your wrist. It leaves a mark like that snap band too, stinging, but it is strangely reaffirming. This book confirms many things that people have suspected for a long time about the corruption of higher education, the unhealthy influence of social media on Gen Z. It will make you fearful for our future, while it delivers the reader a greater breadth of understanding. The social pressures exerted on this generation are remarkable, and this book helps you wrap your hands around the origins of these perspectives. I would highly recommend this book for anyone that has a Gen Z child. And with that, that's the end of my review. Please welcome to the show, Jane-Marie Auret.
Thank you.
Did you think the review was okay?
I like the review a lot. I agree.
It was fun. This was a great book. Now, I want to make sure I understand. Now, you are from Michigan, correct?
I am from Michigan, yes.
I lived in Michigan, went to college in Michigan myself. So where are you at geographically?
So I'm in the Ann Arbor area.
Okay. I was raised in Battle Creek and lived in Southfield and went to school in Mount Pleasant.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, you're Central Michigan, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's super cool.
It's a great school, but U of M that's a bastion of liberalism there, boy, I'll tell you, the Ann Arbor area.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. I grew up in Ann Arbor, and then I went to Emory for college. So both of those are bastions of liberalism. I think that both of them also are appealing to a specific group of people who feel that there's a strong upward social mobility in taking up liberal values. And I think that that's been kind of a staple throughout like my entire lived experience.
Well, normally I ask authors to kind of tell themselves, tell the listeners about themselves. I want to alter that a little bit today because I read a lot of political thrillers, which are immersed in various tropes about Middle Eastern backgrounds and et cetera, and about people coming from certain parts of the world. What was amazing to me about your book, which had nothing to do with the subject matter, which was you gave an in-depth understanding of the culture you came from. And I was describing this to my wife when you were talking about the incident at the pawn shop and the shoplifting that took place, and I'm relaying to her, how I got sucked into this story, and where you took it was a very different direction than what I expected.
Mm-hmm.
You really forced me to kind of up my game a little bit now on how I describe other cultures. So thank you. But I was wondering if you could tell everyone a little bit about your background culture and how that influenced this book.
Yeah, absolutely. So the story that Blaine is referring to is the first one, My Brother the Fanatic, and it's about my brother who. So the story is fictional. All the stories are fictional, and any like parallels to real life are coincidental. But it kind of traces the culture of taking up Islam in the Middle East as a way to like reclaim what was lost. So, for example, in the 1920s, the type of Islam that was practiced in the belt of patriarchy, which is like a region that extends from Morocco up to the border of India, and like all of these regions have like kind of a tribal social organization that's patriarchal and patrilocal, and lineage is traced through the father. And all of these organizations, all of these cultures are kind of like they're not the same. They have different ideas and they speak different languages, but they're all kind of marked by this immediate like sense of like men have to protect you. They're just like not centralized power. They're like local power. And in a situation where you have like local power, men have to fight each other. And this idea of patriarchy is really like connected to the immediate experience of violence in society, because when like you're seriously like there's a genuine threat that like someone's going to come in and take your stuff, and like you have to be the person who defends it, like men do it. Like men fight, they just do. And I think that feminism in the United States only took root after World War II, when America kind of became the preeminent superpower. And there was no like legitimate threat that like someone was going to come in and like take your stuff and like or like do something violent to you, or do something terrible to a woman, whatever. Like a lot of anxiety and fear in the Middle East is based around like the need to protect women who otherwise can't protect themselves in that situation. Then the other thing is that the Middle East has kind of gone through a period where they feel very humiliated, because there's this kind of sense of like strong men, and like men have to like lead and they have to fight, and they kind of like have like this code of masculinity that's just kind of been affronted by colonialism. And so basically Saudi Arabia has like a very specific type of Islam that they practice. And that type of Islam is called Wahhabism. And they sent a bunch of evangelicals to other regions of the Middle East, and they kind of like got the young men to take up this like super like if the Westboro Baptist Church made a deal with like the United States government and then started like sending like people to convert the rest of America, that might be like an analogous situation. But Wahhabism is like a super stringent, super militant type of Islam that like gave a lot of young men in the Middle East a strong sense of manhood. And that's definitely like reflective of like the Twitter and the tweets that people have been putting out, because like the Middle East is using social media like us, except like in the West, social media has kind of like taken a strong left turn, and we've like gone into like secular liberalism. And the Middle East is using Twitter and Facebook and stuff, but they're like competing about who can be the most religious and like who can be the most God-fearing and stuff like that. So yeah, that's so the story is about how the character steals a radio, and then like the dad gets really up. The dad first has to like fight a police officer from Uzbekistan, right? And once that stops, the dad gets like really angry at the brother instead of the sister because he expected the brother to protect her and the brother to like have the moral development to understand that like if you allow a woman to do this, then he will then she'll like actually be in harm's way. So the father blames the brother a lot more than he blames the girl, and then the girl doesn't understand like why they got punished. So the dad shows her a real picture about a man named Muzaffar Abbasov who was considered an Islamic militant in Uzbekistan, and he was taken to this prison in northern Uzbekistan called Jeslik, and for some reason we don't really know why he was strung up from a ceiling, and then the lower half of his body was submerged in a pot of boiling water and he died. And that picture it got circulated around like Western human rights watch organizations are like, hey, you know, like Uzbekistan is boiling people. That's probably something that like the international community should be aware of. This happened in 2003, and since then, like Uzbekistan has done a lot to reform and like care about human rights and stuff. But in a situation where like legitimately, like if you go to prison, there's no human rights. The fear of getting like imprisoned or having to deal with authority is pretty intense. So yeah, that's the story.
Oh, to me it was amazing because you took these incredibly, I want to say, harsh situations, you know, like a father beating a child type thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was deeply emotionally wrenching for me to read that because as a father, I'm like, I can't imagine, you know, hitting my son for something my daughter did type thing.
Right.
But you did in such a way that I was sucked in. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that was beautiful. As a writer, you truly are gifted in that ability to put the reader in the situation. But what's interesting is you pull back from a lot of this, and the book there's much more to it, obviously, in this. There are
Mm-hmm.
many stories that are in this that are compelling, but you managed to kind of then in those secondary chapters kind of pull back and go, so let's look at Gen Z and what this really means to them. You know,
Mm-hmm.
so I guess the ultimate question is, what do you want people to walk away from with this book? What is it that you want them to take away from it? Because it wasn't preachy, it
Mm-hmm.
was thought provoking. And that's very different. And we don't see a lot of that in books today.
Well, thank you so much. That's honestly the highest praise that anyone could give me, that it made you think about just the way society is going. So the thing that I would want people to take away from the book is this idea that um, all human beings have experienced like strong negative emotions in their own internal life, right? This isn't a new thing, but the rates of mental health problems in Gen Z um, are reflective of the way that we're thinking about negative emotions and the way that we frame our own internal experiences. And so, for example, like my grandma would never use a word like mental health to describe what's going on inside of her. She would say soul. And the difference between having like mental health and having a soul is like within a religious framework, you have this idea that if you behave ethically, then you have aligned your soul to God. And that's kind of like reflective of all Abrahamic faiths. I'm not sure if this makes sense, but
No,
if you
no,
read the, okay,
you're
cool,
fine. This is good
cool.
stuff.
Cool. So like instead of like using a word like depression or anxiety, she would use words like grief or sorrow or shame or something like that. And there's actually a very substantial difference between those words in the sense that like depression prescribes a medical cause to the sadness that you're feeling, and sorrow prescribes a, a more existential and controllable cause. Like if you feel guilt, that's because you have done something that has caused you to feel guilty, and that kind of empowers you to change your sadness because you can go and like make it right, and then the guilt goes away. And a lot of times people say like I don't have good self-esteem, And they don't realize that if you really genuinely want to respect yourself, you have to act like a respectable person. Like, just bottom line, if you want to respect yourself, you have to you can either like try to develop self-esteem while acting like someone who isn't really respectable, or you can and in that case you're kind of lying to yourself, right? But if you behave in a way that like you like are able to say, I did something good for another person, then you don't really have to convince yourself to have good self-esteem, because you are as good as your actions. And that's something that has all Abrahamic faiths have like made society flourish because of that belief in that principle. And secular liberalism has completely torn people away from the consequences of their actions. And because of that, a lot of people don't understand the essential relationship between what you do and who you are. So yeah.
It's true, and that's why it resonated with me, I think, strongly. I've been targeted by the cancel culture crowd. They came after me. They got me fired from essentially sci-fi series that I had worked on for 36 years. And for no real reason other than they didn't like my politics.
Right.
And like you said, there's this sense of, well, it doesn't matter that I did this. There's no. I've had a few people reach out to me and apologize for what they've done because they realized afterwards what they did was wrong. But a lot of people don't do that. And it really struck me in your accord with me reading your book that's kind of what these people do. There's no consequence to their actions. They go online and they're a completely different person.
Mm-hmm.
One of the sections that really stood out to me as well was the discussion of the young girl going to school, and she is ostracized essentially and exiled from various groups on college because she didn't play along with whatever their social agenda was. And I find that to be very true. I've got friends that their kids have gone off to college at this point, and they're like, these kids get targeted by the other students very quickly. And it's like, well, we didn't see you at the protest this weekend.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I don't care about that. And it's like, well, you have to care about it. And if you don't, you're part of the problem. And you really hit that in that chapter, I think, very well. I was wondering if you might be able to kind of talk a little bit about that, because it was very true to life from experiences I've heard from parents who have said, my kids are struggling with this. There's a BLM protest, and if they didn't put "I support BLM" up on Facebook, they were getting visitors at their door.
Yeah.
Saying, "Hey, you, what's your problem?"
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, they were. So first of all, I'm really sorry that you were the object of that kind of rage, because that kind of rage is essentially the exact same thing as witch burning. And people don't understand that they are just following the madness of a crowd. And in the madness of a crowd, they've kind of forgotten the idea that you're a person who deserves respect and dignity. So that totally sucks. And that's definitely something that happened a lot in my college campus. There was a lot of hysteria that caused people to forget the fact that people who disagree with them are still people. So I think that you're talking about A Meditation on Freedom, which is the third chapter in the book.
Yeah.
And that one's just a completely true chapter about the way that I had to think about whether or not I was going to break off from the ideologies that really functioned as a religion. So I'm going to go back to this religion idea for a second. So
Please.
When you don't have a religion that has a cohesive moral code, you still have the desire to belong to something, and you still have the desire to be a force for good. And in those two cases, you can kind of create a para-religious environment through your politics, because you have a community of people who have the same politics as you, and you also can feel like anyone who disagrees with you is only disagreeing with you because they hate other humans, or I don't know, if you don't agree with this particular welfare policy, it's because you scorn the poor and don't think that like they should get help when they need it or something, right? Like you immediately ascribe the worst negative motivation to someone who disagrees with you without like hearing them out, because you don't know their perspective, because you shut your mind off from their perspective, because you want to fit into the group that you're already in. And so yeah, I was in a super liberal environment for both college and high school, so there was a lot of shame associated with being conservative. And like for example, uh, like I don't know, like if you didn't post something, like you got like a lot of abusive comments, or if you somehow indicated to your teacher that you disagreed with them, you're like, you know, it's likely that you wouldn't pass the class, or you wouldn't do as well in the class as you otherwise could have if you just drank the Kool-Aid. Like that's definitely a thing. But the thing that I talk about specifically is about how a lot of people don't really have an understanding of how big they are in the world right now, because the truth is that you're not gonna like sorry, let me say it like this. Okay, so the internet is infinite, so when you put yourself on the internet, you can kind of for a moment believe that you're infinite, and you see that in influencers like God, I don't who's hang on sorry, I'll go back to this. So you can see that in influencers who will say that they are, you know, in 1,000 years from now, people will watch this video and they'll remember that I had a great day, and they'll remember that this outfit is awesome or something, right? They'll say these things on the internet, and they'll like think that they are creating history. But the truth is that there will come a time that all humanity is wiped out, and even the people like my personal like memory will be wiped out within about 4 generations, but if you become really famous, maybe you'll last a little bit longer. But there will come a time that all the stories of the age of man are forgotten, just like we don't know the individual dinosaurs of the Triassic era, because time is truly longer than our memories. And when people don't understand how completely small they are in the universe, they feel a tremendous need to fit in, because they feel a tremendous need to preserve their own legacy and preserve their own self-image. And they won't break from the group as long as they believe that they will be remembered with eternal shame. So I decided, look, you know, the truth is that my politics don't answer to other people around me. My politics are I'm just going to compare my politics to the truth of them. Like, I'm just going to compare my politics to truth, because truth is infinite, because truth exists outside of space and time. And space and time are much larger than anything humans could ever create. So I decided, look, I'm just going to say the truth, and that's the only thing I'm going to compare it to. And I lost a lot of friends over COVID when I decided to just develop my own politics independent of the way that other people were going along with the crowd. But ultimately, I think that my politics like are now not only authentic, but can really help people understand what is like essentially true about life. So,
well, you know, but that's kind of where your chapters go, and that's I think why I enjoyed the book as much as I did. I don't know your politics from reading the book. Okay,
oh really? Wow.
I don't come away with a sense of 100% where you land on issues. And so I do, my opinion was, this is a good person. This is a person who just looks at things and goes, I want to feel this way, and I have a moral center that guides me to that path.
Right.
And that's something that's lacking with a lot of people that are out there. And to your point, the internet, they feel that they're a big person on the internet, but they're often just insignificant people in real life. They literally don't have a job, or they have meaningless jobs. The only place they have meaning is on the internet. that's the only place that they feel that they have any influence on people, that they have any presence, etc. And I
Mm-hmm.
think your book really hits on that. And yeah, to me, it was like, wow, I think anybody out there that who has got a kid who's going to school needs to pick this book up
Mm-hmm.
because, it's a book that should be shared, I think, between parents and children to kind of go, look, this is what the real world is going to be like at some of these schools. This is how jobs are going to be. Your description of that person that she's working in a nursing home, there was something that happened. We don't know what, but it was something bad happened
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't her fault, but she was the fall person for it. Well,
Right.
that's how the real world works.
Right.
There are times that you are the fall person. Um,
Yes.
and I would think anybody who has a kid who wants to kind of connect with that kid and prepare them for what they're going to be up against.
Mm-hmm.
This book is kind of a vital little playbook, and it's a great read because you didn't. It would have been so easy to remove the narrative portions and just say, "Here's the book," and it's these secondary chapters.
Mm-hmm.
Then it just becomes your opinion. So those chapters become very important because it lays that foundation and it says this is why these things are the way they are. And
Mm-hmm.
you kept it very non-cerebral. You didn't make it psychological theory or whatever. You were like, here's the logic behind this, and
Yeah.
you presented it. And so it's really good. So what's the reaction been so far to the book?
Yeah, so it's really funny that you say that you walked away not really understanding my politics because I sent it to a couple people who I knew, and I got overwhelmingly I've gotten positive reviews because I sent it to people who I knew would already agree with me, but then I also sent it to people who I knew would disagree with me, and I have actually lost a couple professional connections over this book specifically because of exhibits, which is where I talk about I just like present little vignettes of like things that happen. Like for example, um I can count on two hands the number of young women who I know who identify as LGBTQ who have never had a sexual experience ever. And that's really reflective of Gen Z. Like if there's one thing that like marks Gen Z that's like never happened before and probably will not happen like far into the future is that a bunch of people right now who are not sexually active are claiming to have these sexual titles. And essentially what they're doing, I can tell you why you think that you're asexual. It's because as a female, you start to feel sexual urges, and then you go on the internet and you look at a like 3 minute long clip of some guy with a mustache, and you are not turned on by the pornography available to you, and then you conclude that you're not a heterosexual woman. Like truly, the thing that non-sexually active people are describing when they say that they're LGBTQ is that they are consuming pornography um, that's not heterosexual pornography. That's what these women are describing, and there's kind of this conflation now with the idea that like you are your sexuality as opposed to like you like have like a sexual function or like you do something sexual. Like that's pretty conflated right now because of the general identity issues that come with like comparing yourself to media all the time, media on the internet, media with like sex and stuff. So yeah, I think that that's like one thing that a lot of people who are not in Gen Z aren't understanding. They're like, why does my kid's never done, how does she know that she's bisexual? She knows she's bisexual because of the internet, because she's been like a picture of male genitalia is essentially the same level of interaction as a picture of female genitalia, and that's like, that's what people are consuming right now, and that's something that a lot of people aren't talking about, but that's the reason that this thing is happening. And saying that out loud has gotten me into some trouble with some of the people who I previously knew. Another thing that I talk about in exhibits is the way that my professors kind of acted. One day I went into a professor's office, and there was a picture of a baby on the door, and I said, "Oh, is that your grandchild?" She got really quiet, and we exchanged whatever information we needed to exchange about some assignment, and then she took me into another office and in front of the secretary, she turned around and she said, "The first thing that you said when you came into my office is that is you asked me about my reproductive capabilities. You didn't ask me about my work. You didn't ask me how my day was going. You just asked me about my ability to produce children You only like me because of my uterus." And I was like, no, I promise I don't. I'm very sorry to have offended you. I promise that's not what I was trying to say. And then she turned around and she was like, "Did you see this door? It's all, she was pointing to the department head's door. She was like, it's almost always filled by a man. And it's almost always filled by a man because of these types of gender stereotypes that you yourself propagated." And that's, you yourself propagated wasn't the exact quote, but it was, I don't really remember exactly what she said, but she pointed to the door and she was like blaming me for the the fact that like her department was run by a man, right? So there's a couple things to dissect in that. One is that one is that I would have asked if that was your baby if I was talking to a man, because if you put a baby on the door of your office, like obviously like that's like fair game for most human beings. But yeah, that works. You can also do it on Barnes and Noble. But the other thing that I want to say, which is a little bit more philosophical, is that idea of sexuality that this professor was like operating under, like she's spent her entire life like deconstructing sexuality, and that deconstruction and like gender stereotype stuff is the exact intellectual and ideological foundation which has allowed Gen Z to get to the point where they have like these sexual identities. Because the first thing that you have to do is you have to say that like mentioning reproduction is typecasting a woman, and once you've made that connection, then you have laid the foundation for like people to identify themselves by their sexuality. So
it's weird too that the entire concept that you just outlined too, this person is looking at down the hall and blaming everyone else for the fact that a man has that job, and at no point does she maybe acknowledge that the man might be the most qualified person to hold that job.
Right.
You know, but that then feeds the whole myth of, well, there's a patriarchy out there and men are controlling everything and they're the ones holding me back. It could be her very attitude is what's holding her back.
It probably is her attitude. That's absolutely true. I mean, we're in a time when like women are constantly leaders, constantly. There's a lot of female CEOs right now. There's a lot more women in STEM than ever before. And this is a pretty controversial opinion, but I'm gonna say it because I think it's true. The way that society has been dealing with dissent right now, in terms of like what you went through, like cancel culture and stuff, and shaming people, and coming up to people's doors and telling them that their opinion is very bad, that is a very hyper feminine way of dealing with like dissent or bad behavior. Like I think that girls in about 3rd or 4th grade start learning how to shun each other. If you say something rude, like, oh, Emily said this, so I'm not going to talk to her for a week. Like that's an extremely feminine thing. That's like how our entire like government and society is working. So
it's true though. There's a whole lot of, we're going to solve the problem by just changing the numbers. We'll change the number of females that are holding these jobs and that fixes the problems. And what they're finding out is, well, that doesn't fix any of the problems.
Yeah.
So what happens then? I've had numerous female bosses in my career. Some were very, very good, actually. But I've also found that in some cases they don't support the women under them. They don't help bring those women up, and so it's like, because they had to claw their way up. I think their perspective has always been, well, I had to fight to get this job. If you want it bad enough, you'll fight for it.
Yeah, no, women are really mean to each other a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And like a lot of women don't like seeing other women in power. Like the reason that we have to say like, oh, women support women is because there's kind of this like subliminal and underlying idea that like when men get into a group, when you feminize a masculine culture, you change things and create new problems. Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Oh yeah.
When men get into like it's just a group of men, like one leader will form. Generally, like you can form a hierarchy with a group of men, but very often when women get together, if there is like one leader, she's either older or she has to like make a very performative effort to care about the opinions of the other women in the group. Like, God, like every single time my friends and I want to go to a restaurant, we're like, okay, like, would you like this? Okay, well, I mean, I like this idea, but we have to make sure that this person has this food. And it's just like we're not saying to each other anything about food. The only thing that we're saying is that we acknowledge that the other people have opinions and we care about the other person's opinion. So there's this constant like acknowledging the group that goes on. Like females get together and they like form social orders. And if a woman breaks that, or she like decides to like take the reins, it's often like something that a lot of other women get really pissed about. So I'm sorry, remind me again what you said, because I was going to take that back.
No, I was so entranced by where you're going, I forgot what the question was to begin with. But
yeah,
it's all about how changing the numbers of women don't really fix the problems that are there.
No, absolutely not. Yeah, I think that the thing is that there's a lot of women who are in places of power right now, and what this results in is like, honestly, it just kind of results in like a more bloated bureaucracy. Like, I don't know how to describe it any other way. Like, if you like have to have like someone, you have to like make sure that the responsibilities are kind of like laid out evenly. You just like create a bigger and bigger bureaucracy. So.
Well, it actually works to the disadvantage. I worked for one of the big four accounting firms for 25 years.
Ooh, fancy.
And they pushed for the diversity and inclusiveness programs the last few years I was there. And I went through all the training for it. It was fine. But what they announced was, when we were going to do promotions, et cetera, we're factoring in diversity and inclusiveness. And what we found is the first thing that happened is we noticed, well, only 2 guys got promoted, but 8 women. And things like that. And so what you end up doing is you tend to look at those women and go, well, you got the job because you're a woman, not because you're the most qualified person for that job.
Right.
And it actually works against the women who get promoted, because people look at them as, you got this job through affirmative action at the corporate level, essentially.
Right.
You didn't get the job because you were good at it. You got the job because you're female.
Right.
And it almost works to the exact opposite effect of what women want in the workplace, which is to be considered equal and treated fairly. So it's the weirdest dynamic.
So can I share a really random anecdote with you?
Absolutely.
Okay, so in India, when Britain was controlling India, they had a problem with a lot of snakes, right? They were like, oh, there's too many snakes in India. So they created this policy that if you killed snakes and brought them to whatever, the office or whatever, then they would pay you like per snake to kill, right? And the goal was to eradicate the number of snakes in this particular region. But what happened is that the locals started breeding the exact snakes that they wanted to eradicate, and then they would bring like huge numbers of snakes to them so they could get paid for the snakes, right? And then like the British officers figured out that that's what they were doing. And they were like, okay, well, this doesn't work, so we're going to discontinue this program. So the locals have like these massive snake farms, and they're like, oh, they discontinued the program, so they just released all their snake farms into the wild. It resulted in like way more snakes. And the reason that I bring that up, obviously, is that the thing about affirmative action is that it really like it really messes with the idea of like basic incentive, and it decalibrates the essential relationship between action and consequence. It like and the thing is that action and consequence is the thing that like creates social order. That is the most fair thing. Like, if you do something, then this will happen for everybody equally. Like, that is the essential like relationship between like humanity and justice. Like, there needs to be a fair relationship between action and consequence. And a lot of those programs break that.
Well, and one of the people said too in the post, I was just checking our YouTube feed, and it was pretty interesting because the story you told is the story, I believe, about every government program that ever happened. It's called Unintended Consequences.
Yep.
Every time we try to fix social issues through mandated laws or policies, we create new problems that no one could comprehend, or a bunch of us could comprehend, but nobody cared because it was more important to create the illusion that you're doing something. And I think I always say that's what our politicians are doing. They're not actually fixing problems. They're creating the illusion that they're fixing problems.
Yes, that's true.
There was a definite undertow to that throughout your stuff that I enjoyed, and it was great. We've had you on for about 40 minutes now, and I really do appreciate it. Where can people buy your book? How can they connect with you? So do you have a web page or anything like that?
Yeah, I do. So you can buy my book at Barnes & Noble or on Amazon or on Audible. And you can connect with me by sending an email to my business account, which is auretstudios@protonmail.com. I also do have a website, JaneMarieAuret.com. And there's a little submission form if you want to contact me. And I would really love it if you contacted me. It would mean a lot.
Oh, I got to tell you, folks, this book is well worth picking up. It was a lot of fun to read. And I learned a lot. And as a writer, that's always good. Scott, do you have any questions that you want to throw to our guests?
I feel bad because I haven't read the book yet, but based on everything you were saying, Jane-Marie, I really feel like you and I are on the same wavelength with a lot of this stuff. A lot of the things that have happened in the last, let's really say since the 60s, is, the wrong people using the right motivation to do terrible things. And, and women are just they're not the benefactors. They are the foil, if you will, for this whole setup. And now women have actually been cast aside and replaced by trans and because anybody can be trans. So, so it's very interesting. I'd love to talk to you at length later. Maybe you can come on the council sometime when we do an episode that's a little more culture war focused, because there's a lot of deep stuff going on with what you're saying and the greater culture war that we're facing right now. And the culture war, I mean, most people think of the culture war, they think of Star Wars and Marvel Comics and, cancel culture and things like that, but it goes way deeper, and there's some structural things that are happening that may be irreversible at this point. And so and Blaine, your book series, Blue Dawn, kind of gets to some of those structural things. So anyway, I'll stop prattling on, but if you would, Jean-Marie, hang on after we go off, and I want to chat with you a little bit.
Yeah, I would love to do that. Yeah. And by the way, I was going to say that I also read Blue Dawn, and it was very, very good.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, this is about you, not me today. So,
okay, cool.
But this is, and Scott, I think you did hit the nail on the head. This is part of the greater Future Conflicts channel. And when we talk domestic issues, I think you would be a great guest to bring in, because it's a bunch of old guys talking, and
absolutely.
Our view is a little bit different than maybe, and you tend to go for root cause, whereas we tend to look at reaction and stuff. So, I think you would be a fun addition to our conversation.
I would love to,
especially a Friday episode where we talk domestic stuff. So we'll definitely keep you on.
Yeah, I would love to do that. Thank you so much. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Now, folks, if you haven't already, go buy the book. Okay, it's called Screens and Ego. You also want to make sure that you've clicked the subscribe button and click the like button, because Scott watches those figures. And I want to thank Jane-Marie for coming on to this. This was a fascinating discussion about a great book.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, everybody, have a great summer, and we'll talk to you next week.